before I get started, I do want to extend a special thank you from all of us here at Ada Notes to our sponsors, La Trobe University, RMIT, Deakin, UTS, and Macquarie. So special thank you to those guys. So like I said, welcome. I do tend to, jump ahead of it. So I've already talked about what we're doing today, but once again, I just want to welcome you guys to our 2023 lecture series. It is lovely to be back. I hope you guys are excited to get into today's stuff. I for sure am. So without further ado, let's get into it. But before we do that, I must introduce myself. So my name is Aditi Kalia. I graduated in 2021 as the Ducks and with an ADA of 95. So I've got, I did Biology, English 3 unit, PDHPE Chemistry, and Maths 3 unit. And I'm currently in my second year Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Advanced Studies, Medical Science at the University of Sydney, studying as a Delhial Scholar and majoring specifically in Medical Science and Political Economy. So personally, I'm a huge Potterhead, love Harry Potter, and love reading generally, especially the classics. A super sweet spot for classics. So just to sort of go through how today will run, we have lots of stuff to get through today, like I said earlier, and lots of different tips and tricks for English advanced success. So I will talk you through them. I will try to make this, simplify this, make sure that we are all on track. And this is, but like, it's very important that what I talk about today is not just what we are covering, but why you should go ahead and cover them, and what specifically you should focus on. So your job today is to be obviously actively listening, and that I know sometimes can be a bit hard when you're sitting across the other side of the screen, but I think the best way to do that and to maintain that attention is to jot down some notes, things that stand out at you, things that you can that you may have already heard about, but adding on to them. So definitely be taking notes. I have a big habit of, expanding a lot on what I say and not reading off the screen. So I will be talking a lot. So try and jot down important things that stand out at you, and we will be interacting with each other today, and I will be answering questions as we go. So definitely look out for that as well, and please ask questions. I'm going to be online active and answering your questions as we're going through the lecture, so definitely ask as many questions. There is no question is a silly question, so I encourage you to ask away to your heart's content, and I will be answering them all. So so just making sure that I know in the past there have been times where I've missed some questions, but today I really want to get to all your questions, so please ask away, and definitely ask new questions. So today we are, like I said, we are recapping Module A. We're going over the basics of textual conversations, really making sure that we've got our main ideas, but also our little nitpick things all set out, ready to go for Module A. We're then going to dive into Module B, because I'm assuming for most of you you would be progressing on to Module B next, or Module A if your school's sort of changing things around. So either way, I really want to cover these two things today and just make sure that we're feeling really comfortable with what the basics are of the modules. Once you understand, what we're actually looking to do, it would make so much sense when you actually go ahead and look at your text and apply this understanding to your text and your essays. So with Module A today, we are diving into the syllabus first. I will be going through what the main ideas of the syllabus are. Then we'll look at essay construction, because of course Module A essays are huge, right? So we will be going through that. And finally, I will be discussing study tips on how to best approach Module A. So in this module, we're doing all of that, but I won't read that simply because I'm going to summarize the main ideas for you. So basically, I think the biggest thing that stands out at you from Module A is resonances and dissonances, similarities and differences. Basically, where are the texts sharing ideas and where are they disputing one another? Then reimagining and reframing of the text, that is of course the whole purpose of a module. So this is all about textual appropriation. And the example I've got there for you is T.S. Eliot's Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats being converted into that monstrosity right there. So that's an example of textual appropriation. But of course, the texts that you have studied or are studying in Module A are also examples of textual appropriation. Then common and disparate issues. So these are themes that are belonging in one or both texts. If one text is, for example, talking about a specific thing, why is that second text either also talking about it or not talking about it? Why is there, why does that sort of difference exist? Also, context is huge, right? So, influence of society in which the text was produced, and context really underpins all of Module A. It is the key to Module A. So, your text both shapes and it is shaped by the context. So, for example, we've got political context, so that revolves around the power structures and ideologies that dominate society, figures, systems, policies, historical events like wars and revolutions. We've then got social context. So social context revolves around society, our values, our beliefs as a collective. And finally, we've got literary context. So literary context is ultimately now looking at, what was the sort of the I guess the circumstances or the what was the literary framework of framework like at the time that your text was published? What was the media producing and what was being consumed by the public? What is our attitude to media and literature now, and what was it like at that time? So with Shakespeare's work, it would be so different to what it is, with, for example, Atwood's Hackseed. You can see the difference in the literary context as well, and it's huge. And that is in a really big way shaped by social context, right? So we are looking at how these key ideas intersect. So the key takeaways that we kind of want to use, right, to actually form our own personal analysis and our own personal voice that really directs the reader through the essay is, what are the similarities and differences within your text? And why do they arise? How has context influenced both your texts? Like I said, context is the key here, really. What is the purpose of appropriating text? And finally, what is the value of the comparative study? That last bit, that value of comparative study, that is your personal thesis. This should come through every time in your essay. You want to really aim, for example, in your thesis to tell me what are we, answer the question, then tell me what are we taking away from this comparative study. So I think that is sometimes that is a bit overlooked, but really importantly, you don't forget that there is a value behind studying these two texts in light of one another. So the first two, that is in your analysis. That forms the crux of your analysis. Why are there similarities and differences, and what exactly what exactly is the reason behind why they sort of stand out. So that's the first thing right there. Secondly, how has context influenced both your texts? Also in your analysis. We then have purpose of appropriating text and values of comparative study. That comes in your thesis. Why are we actually doing this? What is the purpose of going ahead and looking at the two texts in light of one another? So that is your thesis. So that is a syllabus dive done, the main ideas from the syllabus. Again, please feel, if you have any comments, any questions, feel free to send them through. So now let's have a look at essay construction. What makes a Band 6 essay, right? Because that is, at the end of the day, our goals. Your goal may be, for example, to get a Band 5 essay or a Band 4 essay, to improve even generally. So whatever your goal is, really, the best way to achieve it is to smash your Module A essays. Sorry, I just literally hit my computer so hard. So yeah, so to smash your module A essays. So how do we go about doing that? Well, there are three main components for it. We've got clear structure. So we really want to make sure that the way in which our essay sort of proceeds, it's clear, it's concise, and makes sense. And most importantly, the ideas built upon one another. You don't want to repeat the same idea in 10 different ways. You don't want to constantly tell me, ultimately, for example, readers are able to see this, or readers are able, like, just the one thing, tell that to me 10 different ways. That doesn't cut it. There is a lot to go through. There is a lot of meat in your textual study. There's a lot to sort of deconstruct. So I really want to make sure that every time that you're introducing an idea under a theme, for example, if you've got the theme of power, for let's say Richard III and looking for Richard, every time you're telling me something different about the power, you're building upon that key idea of, okay, this is how power is seen in the text, but then we see the way in which Shakespeare really talks about the power in terms of determinism. However, that is contrasted by Pacino, who talks about more so who frames power in more so a democratic sense, which adheres to his 20th century context. Things like that, where you're taking a one big idea and really deep diving into these sort of smaller ideas that constitute that big idea. So that's clear structure. Original analysis, that obviously comes through by really engaging with your text and finding quotes and finding evidence that really brings your point to light. And finally, personal voice. So clear structure. I would say that the best structure to use in Module A is an integrated structure. Obviously, like, I know so many people who use a text-by-text structure, or sometimes schools necessitate you, like for example in assessment tasks, to use a text-by-text structure, so you may feel more confident with that. Look, either way works, but I personally believe that an integrated structure really helps you to nail that comparison, to really make sure that throughout essay, like, your essay is sustained with that one core thesis, and you are really bringing that comparison out every time. That can be a bit hard with discussing like that. Having that comparison aspect of it can be a bit hard with the text-by-text structure, especially because most of your comparisons, like, concentrated in that second adapted paragraph's body paragraph, right? So that can be a bit hard sometimes, but I would say that an integrated structure is a really good way to go about it. And the way it's structured is that you want to base a paragraph on themes. So you want to have 3 big paragraphs. So with theme 1, you want to discuss both text. Theme 2, same thing. Theme 3, same thing. But each time you're actually giving me, it's easy because you're going like one for one. Text 1 says this, text 2 says that. This is what I sort of get away as a result of this study, and you can sort of do the same thing, and that's a bit easier than that text-by-text structure, but whatever works best for you. A sample essay structure. So for example, we've got 3 texts here. So we've got Tempest Taxied, 4 texts: Tempest Taxied, Mrs. Dalloway, The Hours, Ariel, Birthday Letter, so Platt and Hughes, and Richard III, Looking for Richard. So this is where, to give you an example of how you can go about structuring your themes. But as you will notice that the 3rd paragraph each time is language. And the reason that I would recommend doing something like that, to have language as your 3rd paragraph, is to really comment on how is language shaping this discourse, how's language like playing a huge role in this appropriation, and what is the power of language. And that is a really nice sort of self-reflexive way to show the marker that you are engaging with with the way in which change is being manifested, and that's through language. So let's start off now looking at the structure, a clear structure. How do we actually have a clear structure? So we've got an intro. Firstly, a good intro provides a clear thesis as a response to the question in the first sentence. please try not to repeat the question. Try not to use, repeat the keywords word for word in the question. You really want to frame it, basically. You want to frame it, and you want your explanation of thesis to be 2 to 3 sentences max. Otherwise, it can get very clunky. It can be a bit hard to sort of, read through. So just make sure it is elaborating on the question. It is, framing the question in light of your text, and it's elaborating on the question. It's not just repeating what the question or the keywords are. If it's a quote, I don't want you to just say, if the quote says text can, for example, a very simple example. If the quote says, text can evolve with time, or values evolve with time. In your thesis, you don't want to say, textual conversations allow us to look at how texts evolve with time. That is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But that is a very simple way of putting the thesis. What you want to say, you want to frame it more. You want to frame it in light of your text, and you want to add on to it and elaborate it. So you want to say, through the textual conversation between these two texts, it is evident the way in which societal values evolve and transcend time in order to have this effect, and this can be seen in the evolution of these two values, which ultimately, or something like that, where you're adding on to it, you're telling me a bit more. And so I may end with, ultimately this tells us that language inherently remains the same to humans. The meaning might change, but the core of language and the core of these ideas remain the same. So it's very important to really add on to that. So explanation of the thesis, again, no more than 2 to 3 sentences. Introduce your text as an example of your thesis in action. That is what you want to do. This is evident in these texts, or you want to introduce it within the thesis. Key contextual so introduce your text. Now, sometimes, because we're so used to like calling the author a certain name. So like for Shakespeare, you don't say William Shakespeare, you just say Shakespeare. For Donne and Wit, you just say Donne, right? You don't say John Donne. So that habit I've seen sometimes being carried through to essays, where in essays I would say, this is evident in Shakespeare's text and Puccini's text. You need to give me full name. So full name of the composer, the year that it was published, form, and key contextual features, like only the most important ones. Like for example, for Keats, you may want to talk about, for Keats, you want to talk about the Romantic periods, like mention those key contextual features. For Platt and Hughes, you definitely want to comment on the personal relationship that is, underpinning the whole study of the two texts. Signpost paragraphs, quite important, and provide synthesis statement with audience impact. Too often, again, I've seen, in essays at the end where you don't quite put it all together and give me an audience impact and link it back to the textual conversations and lead it into the essay. I know it's a lot, that's like 4 different things to do in one sentence, but you really want to aim for that. And once you nail that structure for that last sentence, which is, your synthesis statement with audience impact, would link back to textual conversations and leading the reader into essay, you can easily adapt that sentence every time. You wouldn't have to change it every time. It'd be a bit easy to adapt. So let's have a look at this sample intro now. So the connection between text create an ongoing cultural conversation that gives insight into truth. In your response, discuss how your pair of prescribed texts engage in this conversation to shape audience's perspective. So now what we want to do is let's have a read through this. So through a comparative study, audiences may dissect the dissonant perspectives onto themes that connect texts in an ever-evolving cultural conversation. So you can see we're not repeating the question. We're not saying that ultimately texts create an ongoing cultural conversation. What we're doing is we're adding on to that, and we're framing that in light of the text. So through a comparative study, audiences may dissect the dissonant perspectives on themes that connect texts in an ever-evolving cultural conversation. In turn, they excavate differing truths, which complicates the apparent universality of such themes. Such a notion is reflected in Sylvia Plath's striking collection of poetry, Ariel, 1965. So that's a clear statement first right there. Then we've got a text, so Ariel 1965, which finds universal truths about identity, gender, and language, upended by Cold War anxieties and the advent of postmodernism. Yet, Ted Hughes' poetic collection Birthday Letters 1998. So both my texts are there. I have introduced them. I have defined what the form is. So you really want to aim for to have this key context or form terms when you introduce your text. So like if you are introducing, for example, Richard III, for Shakespeare, I might say, and Shakespeare's Elizabethan drama or Elizabethan tragic drama or something like that, where I'm making sure, tragic drama. So with that, I want to try my very best to include the keywords. So that's the introduction of the text. We then have the paragraphs. So you are telling me what your main ideas are. So identity, gender, and language. I know, like, sometimes you can elaborate on them, but because there's so much to sort of mention in a modern intro with both texts, and definitely try and prioritize your form and context key ideas first. I would say just mentioning like one word themes should be fine, but if you are in a habit of expanding on them, please don't expand too much. Just aim for like one line at the very most. That should be like maximum. So introducing the text, and let me just go back so I can read the next slide. So yeah, Ted Hughes' poetic collection Birthday Letters 1998 source deep in this narrative, source doubt in this narrative, reauthoring it through the personal lens of the couple's marriage. There's the context, and in turn asserting conflicting perspectives about the same truths. Thus, through an examination of intertextuality, audiences may observe the multiplicity of ideas that spring from universal themes and in turn reject the possibility of absolute truths. And that is my audience impact. What am I gaining from this? So that's that. Now, let's just quickly think about thesis, right? So your thesis is made of two main elements. Your response to the question, which you will formulate on the day that you're given the question, and your personal thesis. So, you can, in a general essay, have an awesome thesis ready to go, your master key essay that you're going to adapt every time, but that can be very hard if you just sort of go off that one essay and you don't really practice that adaptation. That practicing is so important. So, and every time, the big idea when you come about adapting your essay to different questions, because let's be real, we have to do that, right? It's about responding to the question and including your personal thesis. Your personal thesis can be prepared outside the exam room, and that is basically responding to what the module focus says, to textual conversations, and for each text, the personal thesis may be different. So for Richard, it may be more so about how the two texts are shaping the conversation about power. While we're done and wit, I may say that the personal thesis is about this notion of mortality, and this grasp of life, for example. So really important that we can go ahead with that personal thesis being prepared, but the response to the question comes on the day, and then it is a matter of like conjoining the two and having your thesis ready to go. So definitely practice a lot with that. I personally didn't do like a master essay kind of thing. I would just sort of go ahead and have my quotes and ideas ready to go, and then each time adapt that to a different question. But I know for a lot of people, having a master essay ready to go works really well. So if that's your case, definitely make sure that you are prioritizing this adaptation to different questions. So ideas for a personal thesis, like I said, they will depend and they're derived from the study of your text, and they are specific to what you learn from the text. So each text you learn something different. So consider, for example, things like, why do composers appropriate text? What is the value of a comparative study? And also note that the questions generally can be often very similar. So, do ideas transcend time, or are they bound up in context? Questions like that, where it's a matter of now applying your personal thesis to the question. So some other ideas here for your personal thesis, like showcasing the power of language to reshape context, critiquing the canonical status of text, or highlighting how themes transcend time. So those are some ideas there, but again, they will depend quite highly on your study of the two texts. So let's have a look now at the key points when it comes to your body paragraph. Aim for an integrated structure, just because all that I've said so far can be so helpful for a comparative essay, and like that, that comparison element can be easily achieved through an integrated structure. Make sure that you're balancing the discussion of the text and not getting too carried away with one text over the other. And finally, be comparative. Like, it is all about the textual conversation. So, using words like similarly, this mirrors, likewise, those sort of connective words can really show the marker, firstly, which text you're talking about, give them direction, and show them that you're really looking at the text in light of one another, and you're drawing out those distinctions between the text. Okay, so here I've got a structure for you. So for a body paragraph, so paragraph 1, start off with your child text. So quote 1 is child text, quote 2 is parent text, quote 3 is child text, and then you reverse that. You can reverse that in the second paragraph, or you can keep it the same, but generally you want to reverse that in the second paragraph. So basically, I've got a checklist here for you. You don't have to follow it, obviously, word by word, but this is to sort of have this checklist in your mind that every time that you are writing. So, again, start off with the topic sentence. It should introduce the main idea of the paragraph and also link back to the question. You also, very important, you want to go into the analysis. So don't waste too much time on introducing the concept, the context beforehand, or talking a lot about context and form in those first 3, 4, 5 sentences. You want to get straight into the analysis and then incorporate context and form in your analysis. So ideally by 3, 4 is the max. I wouldn't go that far. I would say 2 sentences for your thesis explanation. Third one, dive deep straight into analysis. So go straight into your analysis, and generally by third sentence or fourth max, you want to be getting into your analysis. You want to be introducing the idea and then going straight into your analysis. I reckon really the big sort of the key for me when it comes to analysis that really worked well for me was QTEL. There are different ways in which you can sort of name it, whatever works, but for me it really helps sort of keep a clear structure in my head as I was writing. So QTEL stands for quote, technique, evidence, link. It just always really helped me be very clear. So quote can obviously be any evidence too, like if it's a film or something, but you want to aim for evidence, technique, effect, and link back to the question, link back to your main idea of your paragraph. You can sort of alternate each time. You want to aim for 2 quotes per text. You can go for 3 quotes where each text in it's in that structure that we just went through, you alternate between 2 quotes from a parent text, 1 for child. You can do that, but I would generally say having 2 quotes that are going back and forth can be really helpful. So altogether you're aiming for 4 quotes in a paragraph. That is a lot. So if you want to aim for 3, that is okay too, but I would say that 4 is ideal. Next, integrating context and values into your effect. So rather than spending a lot of time in going through context at the beginning, this is what the context is, applying setting at the beginning, that can take away from your analysis, obviously, in terms of time, and me knowing the context on its own is not going to be as helpful or as a marker or as important as seeing the context being tied in to your analysis. So try and bring it out in your analysis, and this can be done by to concisely bringing contextual links without harping on about them for too long. So if you're telling me that Shakespeare's written this in the Elizabethan era, I don't want to sit there and read 4 sentences, 3 sentences, or even 2 sentences on Elizabethan era water included. I want to see how the values of Elizabethan era were reflected in the text, which you can show me through your analysis and then link back to your question. Have form-related evidence. That is really important. You want to include form-related evidence because that forms a huge part of the appropriation. Form is the key behind the appropriation. So definitely make sure that you've got form-related evidence. If you're doing a play, you want to have, for example, stage directions and stuff. If it's poetry, have enjambment, like form-related evidence, any techniques. Also, succinctly at the end of your paragraph, summarize your main point, include audience impact, and link back to Module A. Finally, what did I take away about this theme from my comparative study of the two texts? That is what your last line of the paragraph is trying to tell me. What was the big idea that I took away in light of textual conversations? So your analysis should aim to flow something like this. First, I read text A, and I thought this. Then I read text B, and it changed my opinion. Going back to text A, I can now reconsider its ideas with my new opinion. Bonus. At the end of this journey, I can now comment on, or I can now see why, the two texts, studying them together is valuable, and that is your thesis. Sometimes, I have seen, for example, common mistakes that I see in essays is when too often people get so fixated on the analysis or on the ideas of the separate text, they fail to tie back the whole thing back to Module A or textual conversation. So don't lose sight of that. The key idea is textual conversations, always. So let's have a look at this exemplar. Alright, so language has an inherently political dimension, given its unique capacity to remake dominant narratives that shape contextual values. That is my topic sentence. I'm talking about language, and I am presuming that in this case, my question will more than likely be something to do with how values have evolved over time, about context, and how we can see that change in values and how that is reflected in language. So Shakespeare's Richard, now this is a body paragraph, Shakespeare's Richard explicitly reshapes his identity in the eyes of others through skillful contortions of language. Thus, like the formal vice in iniquity, I moralize two meanings in one word. So that is my quote. I am introducing. So can you see, by the second sentence, I'm already in my analysis. I'm not wasting time on telling you the context beforehand or, talking about the form beforehand. I am going straight into my analysis because I will bring in my context and values now. Shakespeare's allusion to the medieval character of the vice mobilizes connotations of performativity that are uniquely constructed by language. Lady Anne affirms the duplicity of language in the hands of Richard, having grossly grown captive to his honeyed words. The juxtaposing inner images of honeyed and gross embodies the divide between appearance and reality that is constructed by language. So every time, every evidence, I'm linking back to language, as you can see. I'm not just saying that just, for example, I'm not stopping at that embodies the divide between appearance and reality. I'm saying, how does this link back to my main idea? Because this divide is done through language. So that is constructed by language, provoking audiences to question the political influence wielded by words. And that is by audience impact. You don't want to miss out on that. I won't say to have every sentence. You can see in this, we didn't have every sentence, but every second analysis, third analysis, it's important to have it up. And you can change it every time. With the first one, link back to the question. With the second one, link back to audience impact. And that will make sure that your essay, doesn't become monotonous. So, where was I? Yeah, echoing this, Pacino mobilizes language to reshape the meta-narrative of Shakespeare's irrelevance and incomprehensibility by reconstructing it in a medium and language with which his 90s American audience is familiar. Talking about audience is important, especially if you adapt a text where you're now telling me, why has this text been appropriated for a specific audience? What are we gaining from it? As a result, his text is rampant with anti-intellectualism demonstrated through his voiceover, where he states his goal to communicate a Shakespeare that is about how we feel. While Pacino feigns the inclusion of his audience in this docudrama through the collective pronoun, he jarringly deploys populist rhetoric in order to prioritize feeling over analysis that aligns with his own personal interpretation of Shakespeare. You can see how sophisticated this argument is in terms of like a metatextual approach. I'm now looking at how language is being manipulated by the composer to actually have power over the canonical text. Such a notion is heightened by the highly personal and inherently subjective docudrama form, where sustained voiceover and frenetic cuts in the style of cinema verite serve to mimic Pacino's internal monologue. This idea of this comment on form and how the form is being used to achieve a specific purpose, that is important. That is how you want to aim to include your form. You don't want to tell me, the docudrama does this. You're actually telling me what the docudrama is doing in light of the whole, study, in light of actually manifesting language. So consequently, audiences see how personal agenda permeates text and allows composers to reshape society through narrative. My audience impact. Returning to Shakespeare, so this is not telling me, okay, I went Shakespeare, Pacino, now back to Shakespeare. That sort of indication is important. As a marker or as a reader, this is helping me go along with the idea. So let's have a look. Returning to Shakespeare, we may reevaluate the relationship between composer and responder in negotiating political narratives. Indeed, Richard states in his opening soliloquy, "I am determined to prove a villain," where the use of past tense demonstrates how Richard's representation in the written and performed word are constrained by historical determination. If I had, let's say, spent 2 sentences talking about the contextual idea of determinism versus humanism in light of Elizabethan time, it would not have been as powerful as that 1 sentence is here in light of the quote, right? So I am determined to prove a villain, where the use of past tense, I'm linking the technique to the effect, demonstrates how Richard's representation in the written and performed word, because it is a drama, are constrained by historical determinism. Further, it insinuates the role of Shakespeare in propagating distorted historical narratives through the Globe Theatre in order to appease Queen Elizabeth and affirm the Tudor myth. This, and if you're studying Richard III, by now you would know that this is the key. I've talked about Pacino now. I've talked about my second composer sort of twisting the work around in order to have a specific meaning, or not twisting, but manipulating the work in order to sort of have power over the meaning. And now I'm comparing that with the initial text, which also does that. Shakespeare gives us a historically inaccurate narrative in order to appease Queen Elizabeth, whose grandfather was Henry VII, and in turn, through that, affirmed the Tudor myth. Thus, an examination of intertextuality unveils a new political dimension that exists between texts. And that idea itself is so prominent because, with any of the text, there is a political dimension to it. There is a sense of, societal values and power being morphed through the text that exists between the text, that in turn provokes audiences to question the manifold ways language is manipulated to create power structures that govern our lives. And that last sentence easily summarizes everything and really nails the audience impact. That is what you kind of want to do. You want your body paragraph to be a conversation in itself. We're going back and forth. Shakespeare did this, Pacino did this, Shakespeare did this again. This is basically what this is telling me about language. That both texts, written in 2 distinct time periods, are showing me that language is being used to have a political purpose regardless of time. And that's my key idea. Okay, so now finishing up with conclusion. So we want a conclusion to be short and sweet. It needs to succinctly reiterate your thesis, and it is necessary for a Band 6 essay. So that last sentence is to really highlight that if you are running low on time and you cannot write your full, 4-line conclusion or 3-line conclusion, aim to just write a single sentence. That they won't consider the whole essay a sustained response without without a conclusion. So even if you're running super on time, like you don't have the time, write a one sentence conclusion. Just write it down, right? Just because even if it's not the best thing you've ever written, as you can see in that meme over there, even if it's not the best thing you've written a conclusion that still make sure that you're playing in that category of a band 5 or band 6 essay. It's really important to keep that in mind. But yeah, obviously in an ideal world, we want to have an awesome little conclusion that summarizes everything, puts everything into perspective and tells the marker, hey, I smashed out my essay. This is the ideas I've talked about to answer this question you asked me. This is my opinion on it. And you can see that in my personal voice, and this is how I finish off. So that's my essay done. See you later, right? So you want to try and have that. But of course, because time is a restraint, right? Let's be honest. 40 minutes to write an essay is hard. So we do want to still get a conclusion in there, even if it's a sentence lock, even if it's like, in conclusion, the textual the comparative study allows audiences to view this. Like one sentence, not the best conclusion you've ever written, but it's there, so you're still contending for that, band 6 category. So let's have a look at original analysis. How do we have original analysis? What does that involve? And we've already talked about this, in the example that we've looked through. So the key here firstly is form, followed by context, and finally language. How are these three things working together, the triad? How is language, how is language influenced by context, and how is then that represented through form? And similarly, that goes the other way around too. How is form constituting the language which reflects the contextual concerns? So let's see how we can go about doing this. Original analysis is about nailing your evidence and knowing the ideas that underlie it. You want to make sure that for every quote you have a solid idea. Firstly, how do we do this? So you want to compile a list of your main quotes. You can start with like 10, 20 quotes and then cut it down to your main, if you're doing main 12 main 12 quotes, right? So identify the easy techniques first. Tone, repetition, pronoun, tense, easy techniques first. Get them down. I just want to say before I even go ahead, don't have a quote without a technique. I've seen it. I've seen amazing analysis, but then there's no quote, so there's no technique to back it up. So you want to make sure that that relationship between what the technique is doing in order to have this effect is there. You can't just go list a technique and then generically tell me what's happening. That doesn't work out. You need to link the technique to the effect, and you saw that and we saw that with our analysis right here, right? Every time the technique, the past tense, for example, right there, the past tense demonstrates how Richard's representation of the written and performed word are constrained by historical determinism. There has to be that link between the technique and the effect. I don't want to just say that the past, it would be hard to do it, but I just don't want to say that this is evident in the past tense, and ultimately Shakespeare demonstrates how Richard's representation is influenced by the Elizabethan determinist context. Something like that, where I have that disconnection between my technique and my effect. That's jarring as a marker to read, as a reader to read. There's that it's jarring, because I'm not putting it together. I'm not saying how is my technique having this specific effect, how is it being used, and that is the whole purpose of a technique. So very important to keep that in mind. Okay, let's keep going then. Okay, so identify the easy techniques first, and then you want to go ahead and try to identify multiple techniques in each quote. Read the quotes against the grain. You don't have to follow the analysis, that your friends think, that your teacher thinks. You are allowed to go against the grain and really use a quote to back your own idea up. Look for how the quote can be meta, so how it may be commenting on metatextuality, so how it may be commenting on the role of language, on the text itself, or for example, in texts like Hackseed, where you've got like play within a play, how that may be commenting metatextually on the role of performance. Link analysis to purpose, very important. Link it to purpose, link it to audience impact, and audience impact is crucial. You cannot miss audience impact. Yeah, so here we've got analysis. Now this is what I was talking about. She has the oddest sense of being herself invisible, unseen, unknown. There being no more marrying, no more having of children now, but only this astonishing and rather solemn progress with the rest of them. Up Bond Street, this being Mrs. Dalloway, not even Clarissa anymore, this being Mrs. Richard Dalloway. So Clarissa feels that as she has aged, she has become invisible. Youth is behind her. Now she's known as the wife of Richard Dalloway and not as Clarissa. This is an explanation of that quote. This is not analysis. There is no technique. There is no effect. What is the quote doing? Rather, this is an explanation. And finally, there's no audience impact either. So that is something that we don't want to do. Here is an example of language analysis for you. So this is from Tempest and Hackseed. So for Tempest, the quote is, "Our revels now are ended. These are our actors. As I foretold you, we're all spirits and are melted into thin air." So there's a collective pronoun, right? We're all spirits, are revels. There is supernatural imagery, which equates to the illusion of theta. So we're all spirits. Repetition, into air, into thin air. And finally, there's a wistful tone. So that is my analysis, and I'm going to, based on what my argument is, if it's about language, if it is about power, whatever my theme is, I'm now going to use this quote and link all the techniques to my analysis. I may not specifically use all of them. I may just use collective pronoun and wistful imagery, depending on what my idea is. You don't have to include all the techniques, but you want to try and have multiple, or you can sort of break it down into like two technique each, and then write two sentences. You can do that, but just make sure that it is obviously, again, succinct. It's making sense as you're reading through it, and it's not very clunky. We don't want that. So in Hackseed, we've got it's no longer a magic staff, it's only a wooden stick. Broken. Should he bury it certain fathoms in the earth? That would be histrionic. Anyway, who'd be the audience? So here we've got truncated sentences, rhetorical questions. We're dismissing the symbolism of the cane motif, and it mirrors the end of Tempest as he breaks the fourth wall. So that is like intertextuality, and then breaking down the fourth wall is a metatextual technique. But Felix rejects the novel's audience and the act of performance for their entertainment. So now let's talk about metatextuality a bit more. And we can do that through looking at Richard III and looking for Richard. So we've got Richard III, I'm determined to prove a villain. So past particle of determined, Richard has no control over his representation. There is that invocation of stock characters, for example, a vice. And finally, Shakespeare smooths history into tale of heroes and villains accordingly with Tudor myth. So here, the free will of the composer is restrained. However, with looking for Richard, so there's the quote, more about Richard III than scholars. It is a vulgar epithet. Also, there's a dismissive tone, and it is quite egocentric. So here we see the visual comedy of Shakespeare putting his head on his hands while Al Pacino puts on his display. There is a metaphor for Pacino's disregard for Shakespeare's intent, and we spoke about this in the analysis too. So here the free will of the composer is venerated. Now looking at form, right? How form can be analyzed. So we've looked at language, now we look at form. There two types of form. There's two types of form. There's macro and micro. Macro is your general, what the text type is, the genre. The narrative perspective is it linear, non-linear. The structure, is it fragmented, for example, or pastiche as well. Like if it's a pastiche of like different interviews and stuff, like looking for Richard is. Micro, on the other hand, is more so your individual form related techniques like shot angles, lighting, diegetic sound, rhyme, lineation, enjambment, epigraphs. So that's form. And finally, context. We've spoken about context, and context is again the key, for the resonances and dissonances in your text. So we've got personal, historical, social, and cultural text. Obviously, there's more types of context, but I think these are sort of the main ones that play a huge role in textual conversations. So personal voice. Now personal voice really, we will talk a lot more about this once we get into module B, but for now I do want you to sort of consider, in terms for module A, have an opinion on the text, right? So do you like it? Is it well made? What is the purpose of the text? Secondly, experiment with the structure, and that's obviously quite self-explanatory, but if you, for example, you don't have to follow QTL or QTEL every time. You may sometimes go technique first, then quote, then effect, then link. That works too. Like, you're allowed to experiment with structure, but obviously just make sure you've got all the elements there. Finally, clear and clever written expression. This is module A, because you're going, especially in an integrated structure, you're going back and forth, you've got lots of ideas, you want to make sure that you're being concise, that you're not harping on about context or form. You are you really want to, if you've got your analysis tied in nicely and neatly, you will find yourself being very concise, which is what we want. So not having bloated sentences and paragraphs, clearly telling the marker which text you're talking about. So there's that distinction of, conversely, on the other hand, this is seen in going back to Shakespeare. We want to have that. Remember, practice makes perfect, and that is the key here. You want to do as many practice questions as you can. You're not going to get, the chances are you're not going to just get one type of question, right? Like, they don't do like a general question every year where it's just taken directly from the syllabus, or a quote question every year where they've got like a general quote and you link it to your text. It differs every year, and we've seen that in the past for years. So you could get like extracts from the text. You can get like one extract from both texts, or you can get like a quote that's like a critic quote or something. So you want to expose yourself to as many questions as you possibly can in order to make sure that the day that you walk into that exam room, you feel comfortable knowing I got this right. Like, that is super important. So elements of a band 6 essay in summary: clear structure. So integrated structure, again, I think that that's the best, but again, if you've got another one, that's okay too. But integrated structure, really aim for it. Sustain one thesis. You want to come back to that one idea. Direct, so one thesis, and you will also want to direct your marker deliberately through your argument. I see this first, then in the second text I see this, then going back to the first text my view is changed. We want that progression. Original analysis, always identify a technique. Do not use a quote without a technique, because then you're not telling me how the quote is achieving the effect. That is what the purpose of a technique is, essentially. You want to go beyond a literal recount. In fact, skip a literal recount. You don't want that. Finally, link to the purpose. What is the author trying to achieve? Last but not least, personal voice. That is about having a hot take on your text and articulating it clearly. What do you think the text does? So if I talk about Richard III, I may say ultimately it is evident that it's a propagandist play, that it is a play that is disseminating propaganda in order to show audiences this or to affirm this. That is my hot take on it. So very important to try and have all those elements in every essay that you write. So that brings us to the end of essay construction. So let's move on to study techniques. How do we prepare for Module A? So studying for Module A revolves around, firstly, like making your notes, having a good understanding of both texts. So you can do that in any way that you like. You might want to make notes individually for both texts and then bring it together, or you immediately from the get-go might want to look at both texts in light of each other. Whatever works best for you, but generally you want to read both texts, read or watch or whatever, both texts first, and then go about drawing the distinction between the two. Writing the first essay is important. Hopefully by now, if you've done Module A, most of us have written our first essay. That first essay will not be the perfect essay. I still look back at my essays and think, wow, you know, I could have done this way, or I could have done this that way. Like, it's always going to be there, especially in your first module A essay. It is going to feel like a train wreck. Like, it's supposed to, because you are still putting your ideas together. But it's after you've got the first essay, that's where the real work begins, because now you want to try and adapt it to different questions. You want to make sure that every time your analysis is succinct, your ideas are succinct, and you're linking back to the question, you're answering the question. So that's that comes after the first essay. Finally, practice essays. That is literally what I just said. So making notes can be done in lots of different ways. There's not one specific way to do it. You can do it you can do it however you like, and people make notes in different ways. You can have your quote technique, effect, contextual links, themes table. Like, you can do that if that works for you. Like, I did that towards the exams, where I had all my quotes in a table, and that really helped me. You can obviously draw mind maps. Mind maps can be really nice, you know, when it comes to like drawing links between the two texts. You can obviously annotate directly onto the text, or you can make notes like that the lovely picture that we see there, or you can, you know, type up your notes, whatever works best for you. But yeah, just make sure it works for you, and you are able to sort of achieve that purpose of bringing together your ideas. So, okay. Okay. So basically, keep your end goal in mind, minimize note taking, and maximize time for practice essays. So unlike other subjects like biology or chemistry or even PD, note taking isn't the best way to study for English. Just because at the end of the day, you know, you're not answering random questions about the text. It's not a comprehension style exam. You're writing an essay, a proper timed essay. So the best way to study for it is, you guessed it, writing timed essays. So so I would say to sort of have notes for the bare necessities, like contextual keywords, form keywords. You want to have a quote back, that's key. Reflection on the module focus, your thesis statement, definitely you can do that. And added bonus, syllabus terms, resonances, dissonances, colliding, mirroring. So that is the key. But when it comes to syllabus key terms, don't overdo them. Make sure that you're using them where they fit. So writing the first essay, like for example, that when I sort of did my first essay, I thought about the main themes. I thought about, you know, the main ideas, and then from there it was about, you know, putting two and two together and going, this is what, for example, my first theme of power is doing in this text versus this text, and you sort of want to follow that through. So flesh out your ideas, write and rewrite your intro. Like, intros are hard to nail down. It can be hard. It's not supposed to be 4 lines and I'm done, I'm out of here. It takes time to make an intro, to craft an intro that follows through nicely. So write and rewrite your introduction. Base your paragraph on quotes. Like, you want to sort of try and do that. Don't be a perfectionist. Start somewhere. And put it away for a few days, then read it from beginning to end to sort of see how you sort of progress through it. First essay key points that I'm quickly going to talk about, that, you know, transfer across modules. They take the longest, but once you've written it, once you have sort of verbalized your own ideas, it makes a lot of sense. So it definitely makes a lot of sense. Try writing without feeling super confident, so you'll feel like, you know, you've got something to work with. Yeah, look, everyone's first essay experience is different. But once you sort of, the first essay always just begins with trying to, you know, gather your ideas across. But once you sort of get there, then it becomes a lot more easier within refining those ideas. Practice essays. So again, I would recommend practice essays. So that is because, like, I would definitely recommend prioritizing practice essays over essay plans. Essay plans can be good for when you are running a bit low on time, when you still want to, you know, get something done. Maybe it's a one-off day, you're not feeling it, and you're just doing a quick essay plan, and that feels like you've accomplished something. That's when I'd use a practice essay. That's when I'd use an essay plan, or even like just writing a thesis or something. But you really want to aim to do like proper essays and write as much full essays as you can. Try adapting your thesis to different questions. That's the key, right? Your response to the question in your personal thesis, adapt it to different questions. So introductions, topic, concluding sentences, and tweak the analysis and effect based on what the question is. Handwriting essays, because that is what you ultimately be doing. Like too often, if you're just typing it up, obviously there's a difference in speed, and it is hard to write, a 40-minute essay, especially for paper 2, when you've got module A, B, and C, and you've got, 2 essays from what A and B, and then potentially a piece of writing and a reflection. So like 4 pieces of writing in what, like, in 120 minutes, not the easiest. So definitely recommend that you write it down and you build that sort of pace throughout the year. So that brings us to the end of syllabus diving, essay construction, and study tips. So we are done with textual conversations. Now, if you've got questions, please post them on the portal. So definitely post your questions, and I will be answering them. And hopefully you've been posting as we go, and I will be answering them. So now let us move on to, having done module A, to conquering module B, the critical study of literature. I think this one is quite interesting because you can feel a bit lost with module B after Common Mod and module A, where you've got like a specific focus, like in Common Mod, on text and human experiences, but then with module A your focus is like comparative study. So mod B, and I'll talk a lot more about this, is what it is. Like, it's literally studying the text for what it is. So that can be very interesting. So let's have a look at that. So we will go through the syllabus first. We will then critically analyze, we'll then look at critical analysis and critically analyze how to actually analyze for module B, and finally finish off with writing with flair. And in writing with flair, we'll talk a lot more about personal voice and how to sort of form that personal voice. So starting off with the syllabus, syllabus searching, like soul searching. Basically, the key here, the key word that you want to take away, if it's one word, is textual integrity. It is notions of textual integrity and significance. We will look at what it is, but I just want to keep that at the forefront of your mind as we go through it. So what is it asking you to do? In simple terms, it is basically asking you to analyze a difficult text, a big text, to develop your own interpretation of what it means. And it's really that simple. So the texts that are, and I personally found like Mod B texts really lovely. Like, I really like them, I'd say. Honestly, I just studied one, but I just thought that the list was so nice and it was so lovely. So there's Jane Austen, there's Charles Dickens, there's T.S. Eliot, and being a classics fan, especially Jane Austen and Dickens, I was like, oh, that's so nice. So yeah, these are big texts. Like, they are huge. They are hugely informed by a context that we may not be as familiar with, and there's a lot to deconstruct here. So let's have a look further at that. So, our fundamentals. We are basically discussing one substantial text in depth. And through that analysis, through that deconstruction and study, we want to develop a personal interpretation of what that text is telling us about the world, about the time in which it is written, about human behavior, whatever it is. We just want to really get to the core of that. And finally, you will write an essay on it in paper 2, section 2. So hopefully by now we are all a bit familiar with the structure of the paper, but if we are not, I'll just quickly go through it. So basically, as hopefully we know by now, we've got paper 1 and paper 2. That's the first big thing. Paper 1 happens on the first day of the HSC. The first exam is paper 1. The second day is paper 2. In paper 1, you've got paper 1 is solely text and human experiences. That paper is just text and human experiences, and within it there are 2 sections. The first section is unseen text. So unseen text, you will have 20 marks worth of questions generally ranging 3, 4, 5 marks, and you'll have texts that correspond to the question, and you have to answer the questions. And most of the time they're asking you in simple terms, how does this text show an aspect of human experiences? That's paper 1, section 1. Then section 2 of that first paper is an essay, and that essay will be based on the common module text that you studied. So for like common module text that you're studying, text and human experiences, I know sometimes it can be hard to remember the module name and the text for it. So if you study like 1984, Crucible, Merchant of Venice, those texts, that's part of the common module. So you would have 45 minutes each for each section. So 45 minutes for your unseen text and 45 minutes for the essay. So that's paper 1 done. And you have 10 minutes reading time to actually read through all the text that they've given you for the first section. Then you've got paper 2, which is 3 sections. The first section is module A, which is an essay. The second section is module B, which is also an essay. You get 40 minutes for that, 40 minutes each. Finally, you've got module C, which can be which is worth 20 marks, and it would either it would ask you to do a piece of writing and a reflection, or just a piece of writing. Or last year what they did was that you had to comment on the, like in an unseen text section manner, you had to comment on the extract that they gave you first, how it shows like the art of writing or something, and then there was a 15-mark writing. So those for each of those 3 sections, 1, 2, and 3, you're going to get 40 minutes each. So you're essentially writing your module A, your module B, and module C. So essays for the first 2, whatever the like piece for the second for module C, you're essentially writing it in 40 minutes each. So you get 120 minutes altogether. So that second paper is 2 hours long with 5 minutes reading time. The first paper is an hour and 30 minutes long with 10 minutes reading time. So just making that clear now, because we don't really get the chance to actually get familiar with the paper until you get to like half yearlies and trials. So just want to outline that. Now, with module B, let's have a look at what is different. So, no module focus, is that true? No, it's not. That's fake news, because the module focus is basically studying the text on its own. That's the module focus. Then personal interpretation and evaluation, that is key. You're looking basically at what the text means to you. Finally, integrating scholars. So you will integrate scholars, and you will do that to enhance your ideas. That is different from the common mod. We really want to focus on personal interpretation and evaluation of the ideas, because these texts are so diverse. You will have different ideas, you will have different meaning generated from the same analysis that you've done as everyone else. There will be different meaning, and that is what you are showing in this section. So textual integrity, what is it? We are basically firstly measuring the text value. We are talking about the text value. I would say this is one thing that you need to write down, that you need to know. If you're going to take away one thing from today's lecture, it is what textual integrity is. You want to take that away, because if you don't have a clear idea of textual integrity, it will be so hard to navigate module B. So write it down, and every time go back to it. Think about it again and again when you're studying, because that is the foundation of your studying. Textual integrity. So too often what people do is not really care about this. Textual integrity, yeah, whatever. If you are really meaninglessly using this word, it is very evident in your essays. So NESA has seen that, and so applying that textual integrity is key for Band 6. So, like I said, textual integrity is a measure of a text value, but how do we measure it? Firstly, it is measured through a coherent use of language, form, and concepts. So, language, form, and concepts. How are concepts being manifested through language and form? How is form being shaped by language and the ideas? So, this is about these 3 things: my ideas, my language, and form working together to have an impact, how they're being coherently used. The second way in which we measure textual integrity is by how is the text, as we're looking at how the text is speaking to contextual and contemporary audiences. How is it speaking to us? So contextual audiences at the time, contemporary audiences, us now who are reading the text. What is that conversation? What are the ideas that are being expressed, and how have they changed through time? For example, how have they changed from when Jane Austen wrote Emma, and she wrote about how basically in order to, evolve socially and to increase their social standing, women had to marry rich. They had to depend on others. And we now want to see how that idea and the way in which the idea is received has changed over time in our 21st century context. That is the key. So the two main things, like I really, really want you to write this down. I really want to make sure that this is engraved in us today. Textual integrity is measuring a text's value by looking at how coherently form, language, and concepts are working together, and what the effect of the text and what the value of the text is on contemporary and contextual audiences. That is the key. That is what I really want you to take away. So your job is to determine, does your text have textual integrity? Is it coherently using concepts, form, and language? And secondly, is it speaking to contemporary and contextual audiences? Secondly, I would like you to apply, your job is to apply personal interpretation of the concepts of the text to the idea of textual integrity. So you're now looking at, okay, this is what my text told me about the world. And now I have to sort of decide, is it applicable, or is it applicable to the ideas of textual integrity? Is it confidently or coherently rather using concepts, language, and form together to have an important impact, to have a significant impact on contemporary and contextual audiences? Finally, we get to that end game, what the paper would like us to do. And here are 3 types of questions. Obviously, these questions have evolved now. You can definitely, I would recommend going back and looking at the paper from 2019 through to 2022. The 3 types of questions that I've got here for us is, firstly, the primary concern of good nonfiction is the representation of truth. To what extent does this statement relate to your understanding of your prescribed text? In your response, refer to the quotation and your prescribed text. Secondly, Falstaff has been labeled as one of nature's predators. Write an extended response in which you challenge or affirm this view regarding Falstaff in Shakespeare's King Henry IV, Part 1. Finally, the last question is from T.S. Eliot. So Eliot's poetry employs unique voices to privilege personal reflection over wider social commentary. This is its strength. This is its weakness. To what extent does this statement align with your view of Eliot's poetry? In your response, you must make detailed reference to Journey of the Magi and at least one other poem set for study. So let's break this down. I just spoke through 3 questions, and you would notice that with the first question we had a general statement that was about, that would have been a general statement for all the text, and it's I won't say easy, but I'd say it's still pretty manageable in terms of it saying that the primary concern of good nonfiction is the representation of truth. Now, depending on what your text is, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, or whether it is actually, representing the nonfiction realities of life, for example. So this is where you want to deconstruct that and then apply that to your text. The second question is a bit more text-oriented. So Falstaff has been labeled as one of nature's predators. So there's that quote, there's that opinion on the character, and it's your job to now sort of discuss whether you agree with that opinion or not. So that's the second question. Finally, we get to the third question, which is quite specific, and this is probably like a critic's quote, right? Where the critic's interpretation of Eliot's work is that it employs unique voices to privilege personal reflection over wider social commentary. The text is more focused on these individual human elements and on these individual human experiences rather than social commentary, and that is its strength, that is its weakness. Now, as if I was doing this question, now it's my role to break this question down and to actually say whether or not this is true, whether or not it's both whether or not it's the text strength or weakness. And you can see that they specifically want you to refer to a poem. So if you are doing T.S. Eliot for Module B, unfortunately they can do that. You are studying 5 poems, like there are 5 poems set to study, and they can specifically ask you to focus on 2 specific, like they can list a poem that they want you to focus on and one other, or they can say, just refer to your text. They can be very, very specific. So that's something you want to keep in mind throughout your study. So it's important to know all 5 poems in great depth. So that is our syllabus dive done. Let's move on now and let's have a look at critical analysis. So critical analysis is, again, very important for Module B, just like it is for Module A. And with critical analysis, there are 4 big ideas that we are looking at. Firstly, impact on audience, which again links back easily to textual integrity. Secondly, highly sophisticated in-depth analysis. That will form the key for your personal interpretation, and evaluation of the text. Next, personal interpretation of the meaning, again, highly linked. And finally, judgment on effectiveness. How effectively is this text achieving? How effectively is the text sort of showing the specific ideas? And that, again, links back to textual integrity. So that is what your analysis should do. So to put this simply, you want to find out what the text meaning is. What is the text meaning? Does it actually convey those ideas well? If the text is talking about isolation and alienation like T.S. Eliot, is it conveying those ideas well, or is it not doing it? Right? And finally, are those ideas actually important? Is it actually important for that text to convey those ideas? Do they actually mean anything? And through your study, you'll find out that, yeah, they do actually. In light of context, they mean, they have a huge meaning. So ultimately, you want to answer these questions through your analysis, these 3 big questions. So let me repeat them again for you, the 3 big questions that you want to try and answer every time that you are working on your analysis. What is the text meaning? Does it convey those ideas well? And finally, are those ideas important? So text meaning, does it convey those ideas well, and are they important? 3 big questions. So critical analysis, like highly sophisticated analysis, entails 4 main things. The first one, again, is identifying multiple techniques, because often it's the amalgamation of those multiple techniques that achieves a significant effect. So multiple techniques, identifying more difficult techniques. So you do want to aim to do that. This, highly sophisticated analysis does involve that, and we will talk through some techniques that are, for example, considered quite difficult, or difficult even in the sense that those techniques are having a unique and important effect on the text. Finally, second last, analyzing the use of form. Form, again, is key. It's a huge part of textual integrity. How is form working to tell me and to get across those ideas, and working with language? So don't forget form. And finally, identifying self-reflexivity, aka getting meta. We've talked about metatextuality in Module A. We are going to talk about it again here, just because metatextuality is huge because of the role that it plays in conveying specific ideas. So let's have a look at some sophisticated analysis examples, and this is what I'd like you to sort of think about as you are analyzing your own work. Your own text. So firstly, identifying multiple techniques. So we'll break down each the 4 that we've talked about. So identifying multiple techniques. This is a quote from Great Expectations. As I passed the church, I felt a sublime compassion for the poor creatures where we're destined to go there, Sunday after Sunday, all their lives through, and to lie obscurely at last among the low green mounds. So there's a repetition, firstly, of Sunday that creates a sense of monotony, that it's happening every week, it's week after week, and there's that futility of these routines of the lower class. The text itself is about, class distinction, industrialization, which is why, it's focusing on that specific idea. There are euphemisms. There is a condescending tone. So I felt a sublime compassion for the poor creatures. There's that condescending tone, and finally, it ironically juxtaposed with the symbol of virtue in the church. There is a juxtaposition. Next, we've got identifying difficult techniques. So you want to identify multiple techniques. So how do we identify difficult techniques in a text? You may not be able to identify it in every line, but you want to aim for quotes, like have quotes that do have, multiple difficult techniques that are working together to have an effect. Like those will be strong quotes. So here we've got T.S. Eliot's love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. So the 5 poems, it's always a bit of distinction to remember the name of each one. Like I remember all of them, but it's always love song that seems to skip my mind for like 2 minutes. But yeah, this is from the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot, and we've got firstly an epigraphic allusion to Dante's Inferno, which equates modern life to purgatory. Then there's that, I obviously won't read the whole epigraph, but it's there, and that is, it's intertextuality. There's an allusion to Dante's Inferno. Then we've got when let us go, then you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table, let us go through certain half-deserted streets. So here we've got juxtaposition of romanticist imagery with modernist. So just to give you a bit of context on T.S. Eliot, for example, he was he is a modernist writer. The work is deeply rooted in modernism, the literary movement of modernism, and it is moving away from romanticism. Like the time period itself, the literary time period is romanticism sort of fading out, and now we've got a modernist movement coming through as a result of industrialization. So here we've got that juxtaposition of romanticist imagery with modernist imagery, because he's a modernist writer, and he's now saying that the world is not as romantic where the evening is spread out against the sky, but rather there's a modernist reality to it. Finally, we've got an example of synecdoche, which basically is when you've got like a fragmentation of the body parts to dehumanize an object. So an example is, and I've known the arms already, known them all, arms that are braceleted and white and bare, but in the lamplight, down with light brown hair. So that's synecdoche. Further techniques include polyacetyton, assonance, metonymy, oxymoron, enjambment, irony, hyperbole, anaphora, parody, anachronism, jargon, and prestige. So these are some more difficult techniques that you want to be on the lookout for, and of course there are so many more. Next, we want to talk about the analyzing the use of form. So here we've got good night and good luck and unfolding Florence. So with good night and good luck, we've got use of digesters black and white, audience is immersed with real historical period, and with unfolding Florence we've got bricolage, there's collage interview, animation footage, so that depicts the complexity of the person's life and how that cannot be condensed into a single narrative. So linking form back to purpose is important. Okay, finally, identifying self-reflexivity, aka getting meta. So this is, linking back to metatextuality is important. So how does the author reflect the nature of language? We've got, firstly, they may be subverting traditions and conventions. So we saw in that example from the T.S. Eliot poem where he's subverting the romanticist imagery to modernism. Then they can be breaking the fourth wall, talking directly to the audience. Authorial intrusion is another one. And finally, self-referential discusses writing or language. That is also a trait of metatextuality. So critical analysis is ultimately, we're looking at the personal interpretation and judgment on effectiveness. we want to talk about how is the text coming together, and that personal interpretation and your judgment on effectiveness will come through, critically analyzing the text. So your personal interpretation also, it is an amalgamated understanding of how language, concept, and form is working together, how all these three elements are working together to have an effect. And for example, those factors could be that all these elements are working together to navigate through binaries. Form is being subverted, language, new language techniques are being used, and these concepts are now reflecting a different world that is navigating through binaries. Or the text may be contending with human fallibility. It could be probing universal truths for their values, encapsulates a time period, reveals how human experience is constructed by power. So all of these are different ideas, and these ideas will obviously depend on what your text is. So now let's have a look at, we've had a look at the amalgamation of context, form, and language. But now let's have a look at the second aspect of textual integrity, the second measurement of textual integrity, and that is audience impact. So let me just quickly draw your mind back to the two measures of textual integrity: concept, form, and language, the amalgamated effect of those, and audience impact. So contextual versus contemporary audiences. Contextual audiences, we want to look at what the influence of context is on the what the influence of context is on the creation of the text, right? Every text that we are studying comes from a very important historical time period. Like it depicts almost, like most of the text, like depict a changing, unstable, unpredictable time period. And so we want to comment on what the influence of that context is on the on the composition of the text and how they manifest in the text. You also want to talk about the reception of text in time periods. So reception of text in the time period refers back to, at the time, what was the critical review of the text? What did people think about the text? Did it work? Did it not work? What was the criticism that the text was drawing? And that will come a lot of that will come from integrating scholars, but we'll get to that in just one second. Then how text argues with contextual factors. So this idea of text arguing with the contextual factor is again linked back to the effectiveness of concepts, language, and form, right? How is the text now arguing against these certain ideas that were established in society, and what is the effect of that? Then when we look at the contemporary audience, we want to consider, how does the message endure? How have audiences, how is the message enduring? How are audiences able to sort of see the message being passed on from the time it was written, and are those values being passed on? Are we actually critiquing the outmoded literary conventions? And finally, what is our identity as a collective, and how is that influencing the reception of the text? Again, you will gain a lot more info about this when you look at scholars, and we will get there, I promise, in like a couple of seconds. So let's have a look at sample analysis here. So this is from T.S. Eliot's Rhapsody on a Windy Night. So the disorientation of the individual in burgeoning 20th century mass culture is embodied by the self-effacing narrator of Rhapsody on a Windy Night, whose lack of agency is parodied by the personification of the lamps. Mount, the bed is open, the toothbrush hangs on the wall, put your shoes at the door, sleep, prepare for life. Symbolic of the rapid industrialization and mechanization of life, the lamp's commanding tone and truncated lines bitterly satirizes human subjugation to routines and machinery. Such a concern resonates equally with the contemporary anguish over individual agency. So I want to draw your attention to a couple of things here. Firstly, you can see the techniques were broken down. We've got the lack of agency being parodied by the personification of the lamps, so that's personification and parody. Then we've got some how it's symbolic of the rapid industrialization, mechanization of life. We talk about tone and truncated lines. There's a lot of techniques here, and you want to aim for that kind of analysis where we look at how multiple techniques are working together to have an effect. And then such a concern resonates equally with contemporary anguish over individual agency. And the techniques working together to have an effect, that is linking to the first measurement of textual integrity, how concept, form, and language work together. The second, this sentence of how the contemporary audiences can relate, that links back to the second part of textual integrity, the second measure of textual integrity, which is how is the text interacting with contemporary and contextual audiences. So you can see here, without actually mentioning textual integrity, like you don't have to mention textual integrity. You have to show me through your analysis, through your, effect, how the text is working together to have an effect. Okay, and we saw how it's talking about the contextual audiences here, the burgeoning 20th century mass culture. So the disorientation of the individual in the burgeoning 20th century mass culture, that is linking back to the contextual audiences. Okay, scholars. So, I did say that we're coming back to scholars. Now, I just quickly, like the first sort of thing that I want to say, the disclaimer is, don't replace your arguments with scholars. Again, let me repeat that. Do not replace your arguments with those of scholars. Sometimes, like I have seen essays that overly rely on scholars, that sort of forget that, it is your own ideas that are essentially being marked. The marker doesn't care about what the scholar is saying. They may have read the scholar papers already. They're not marking the scholar. The scholar has done their study, are studying the text in great depth. They want to look at your ideas. So you want to use the scholars to enhance your argument. You want to add in, you want to give your argument, and then you want to use a scholar to enhance that, to add on to that, to add weighing to your idea. You don't want to replace your idea with like a chunk, like a big paragraph from a scholar's work. Please don't do that. So we want to do this. We want to actually go ahead and use scholars to enhance our ideas, because their ideas add on to and go beyond a year 12 understanding. We are only studying the text for a month. They would have studied, not a month, sorry, or for a term, they would have studied the text for perhaps years to gain a good understanding and write that paper on what the text is doing and researched it so much. So there's that really developed understanding that we don't have at this point. They may point out more complex techniques and ideas that are more like that really link back to, for example, contextual or contemporary audiences, and that adds to your argument. So you really want to try and give your argument, say that this is what I think is from the text. Obviously you don't say it like that, but you say that this is the use of the techniques, you have this effect, and this tells me this about the audience, this is how it links to the contemporary audience, and according to the scholar, they think this, they add on to my argument. And yes, scholars can back up any points that may be out of your reach. So if you felt like you've got an awesome idea, but your teacher says, I don't know, or in class, it's not like it's a bit of a stretch. If you feel like that's happening with the idea, but you find a scholar that actually thinks along the same times, can back it up, then definitely go for it. Try and have that. Now, talking about who is a critic. So basically, a critic can really be anyone who has a comment on the text, but we have to be really careful about which critics we choose to include in our work. We can't include a YouTuber who says, T.S. Eliot's work is boring, I don't like it, I had to do it for the HSC, hated it. And this is what the text means. Like you want to be credible with that. So, go ahead, watch that YouTuber. There's nothing wrong with them expressing that. They may not have liked T.S. Eliot. That's very fair. But in your essay, you want to include ideas that come from a reputable source. So I would definitely say to check out journals like JSTOR, Oxford, but also even articles from the New Yorker or the Guardian. They post some really good articles on literature, but you'll find scholarly articles of course too. So definitely go use that, right? But make sure that you are just making sure that it is a reputable source that you're using. So how to actually integrate scholars. Now, aim to integrate a scholar or a critic per paragraph. You want to aim for that. Yeah, but obviously don't overdo it. Don't go like, including a big paragraph or chunks of a paragraph in your work. Just a line, 2 lines at the most should be enough. So do's: skim, read for concepts. You don't have to sit there read a whole journal article. That is something that, that's a bit hard. That's something that if you're choosing to pursue tertiary education, you'll get to that. But yeah, look, don't sit there, get bogged down by details and academic jargon. Read the paper, the abstract, for key ideas. You can always read the abstract, and that will easily tell you whether or not the paper is relevant to you. Secondly, summarize the critical readings into a few key points. You don't have to summarize readings in a document as long as the reading itself, just the key points. You just need the key points that back your argument. Pull out succinct quotes. Do not pull out quotes longer than a sentence. Again, I said, like, you don't want to go there. 2 would be max, like the most, but you don't want to go there. You want to keep it to like a single sentence. You want to just make sure it's succinct, to the point. You can obviously use ellipses in the middle and make it shorter, just so that it conveys your point. Paraphrase critics in your essay to support your point. That is important. You do want to mention the name of the critic. You don't have to mention where you got it from. Like, you can, but you don't have to. You just want to mention the name. Don't use the critic's argument in place of yours. That would be, again, another key point to take away. Don't replace your argument with a critic's. Paraphrase their ideas to back your own idea. Okay, that brings us to the end of critical analysis. Now we're going to spend time discussing how do we go ahead and write with flair, and again, talk through study tips and stuff. So, top tips for personal voice. Personal voice is the key for module B. Sorry, just had like a mind blank for a second. Yeah, so personal voice is the key for module B, because your personal interpretation of the text, and your personal interpretation of the text is so important, and the evaluation of the ideas that directly links back to textual integrity. So you want to have an opinion on the text. What is the text doing? Is it effectively achieving its purpose? That having an opinion is so important. Secondly, adapting structure. Your essay will differ based on what the question is. Like, there's a lot more manipulation, I believe, happens in module B than in module A, right? The questions, again, can be super specific. There is a lot going on. Even though it's quite interesting, because you would think that with module A it's more because they're 2 texts, but because they can give you a very specific question, because the study is about the text itself, anything related to the text, you want to have an adapting structure. Finally, clever and clear expression. Succinctness, conciseness is important for all the modules. But with module B, because the ideas can be so big, right? There's a lot to talk about. You want to have a clear expression that clearly identifies your ideas. You don't want to have, like juggled or murky expression, because that can make the reader confused. You don't want them to be confused. You want to have straight, easy ideas to understand. And not easy ideas, but like express your ideas in a simple manner. So unique analysis is important for that, for having an opinion and expression. So we want to have unique analysis. We've talked about the importance of analysis, obviously, just now. Critiques of your text are important too. You can use those critics to back you up, or to you can argue. You can also argue against the critics. Like, you can do that, but if you do that, because that is a big thing, if you do that, you need to make sure that you're giving sufficient evidence and that your point actually makes sense, that you're not just doing it for the sake of seeming cool and doing it. You want to have analysis that flows. Very important for a clever and clear expression. Introduce rebuttal. You can do that. You can rebut, like I said, a critic. or yeah, a critic, varied sentences. So that is very important to just make sure it's not monotonous. You are going, the sentences are varied, and also that every time, you're changing it up so that the ideas, of course, still make sense. Specific verbs, and finally, figurative language. So, personal voice. How do we go about achieving personal voice? So, like I said, having an opinion is important. How do you react to the text? Don't forget, you are the audience. Every time that you say, hence, readers take away this, or viewers are allowed to take away, or viewers are encouraged to think about this, you want to use that sentence, that audience impact sentence, to really nail your key ideas, or your key understanding. Like, the marker would know that you're talking about yourself because you are the reader. So again, it comes back to asking yourself, do you like the text? Is it well made? Is it well written? And do its ideas have value? Especially when it comes to like well made and well written, when it comes to sort of thinking about that, there are of course times you may disagree with a certain idea, or the way in which the idea is presented. So when that happens, you are allowed to sort of talk about that, and this is where you want to bring in a critic and say, okay, this critic agrees with me that Elliot does this, which achieves this. However, the critic says that he's doing this in the wrong way, or he's doing something else. Whatever you want to try, if you are going to go down that path, obviously having solid ideas is really important. You can't sort of jumble that up or like try to make it work. With module B, it is your own understanding and evaluation that is the key. Now think about what interests you about the text. That's quite important too. Was it a certain character or representation or characterization that really stood out, or was it the ideas as well? And again, critic quotes can help. Critics can also, reading the papers can give you lots of different ideas about the text, but like I said, do not get bogged down by papers. Do not use them instead of your own opinion. Use them to enhance your understanding of the text. Next, we've got experimenting with structure. So structure isn't a rigid thing. You are going to have to adapt it to your argument. And like I said earlier, there is a fair bit of adapting to do because of the different range of questions that you can get. Last year, for example, again, they had was it the year before? Like they can have like quotes that are specific to a text, or a general quote, or extracts from the text. When they've got, for example, like extracts from the text and want you to comment on it, remember that you are expected to include the extract in, just like pointing it out. But yeah, definitely remember that. But with questions like that, this is where you have to manipulate your structure to include the extract in every paragraph. So structure isn't a rigid thing. This is where again practice comes into a lot of use. You want to practice adapting your ideas to different structures. And again, going in with your your quotes and your ideas, there can be a fair bit of manipulation that you have to do because of how specific the ideas can be. The purpose of the structure is to walk your marker through your arguments. They shouldn't sit there, rereading your work, trying to figure out what you're trying to say. That is not the purpose. And, markers are marking lots of papers in like one go. So they're not going to sit there and go like, this idea, like, I see what it means. Like, I can see what it means, but it's not expressed clearly. When something like that happens, you're not getting the marks, right? Remember, markers start off from the bottom. They start off from the bottom and they add marks as they read your essay. It's not like they're going to start off with like a 20 and then go down and go like, they didn't include this, that's 19, they didn't include that, that's an 18 marker. You build up your marks as you go. They are building up the marks as they're reading the essays. So you want to give them that sort of structure and that opportunity to add marks to your essay. So make sure that the structure is clear and you're like outlining every time, you say something. That's why using words like this is then seen in, similarly, on the other hand. Yep, so that's that. One important thing that I will say, especially if you're doing poetry for this one, is studying the text as a whole. And I do want to flag this out just because it just came to me as I was going through the structure bit. if you're studying, like, for example, T.S. Eliot, you are studying the 5 poems as like a set of text. So at the end of the day, in your essay, you do want to talk about how the, what the ideas are that are coming across the 5 texts and what ideas differ between the texts. So even if you're doing the poetry, you're not studying each poem as an individual text, you're studying the collection of poetry as, a collection of Eliot's work and looking at the ideas between and within the text. So just wanted to point that out while I remembered it. And of course, if you've got any questions, please ask. I'll be answering them. So structure is not a rigid thing. You adapt it to your argument. The purpose of the structure is to walk your marker through your ideas and give them an opportunity to add marks to your essay. Ways to vary your structure include switch your PL structure. You can do that, but obviously you have to do it effectively. Your QTEL structure, you can switch it, but you still want to make sure all the elements are there and it's effective and the ideas still make sense. It's not jarring, it's not like, oh, what happened right there? It still makes sense and it still flows easily in light of like the other quotes in your essay. Vary on how you introduce your quote. So that is something that you can do like very easily. Switch it up every time, the use of anaphora in this quote, or this is evident in his explanation of this. Things like that. You can switch it up. And finally, use a quote from critic or writer in your introduction. You can do that. And you do that to like back up your thesis or your idea. But again, you have to be very careful with how you bring in a critic. You mention their name though. You can't obviously make their idea seem like your own. That is plagiarism. So you want to mention their name and then bring that idea in. Now, looking at clear and clever expression. 2 words here, short sentences. So too often, like, I totally get it. Like, when you're writing in your head, this idea is making sense. It makes sense. So you write this whole sentence and then you realize that sentence is like 3 lines long or 4 lines long. That's not very good. It can make it jarring to read. So we want our sentences to be short, succinct and cohesive so that the meaning is not lost. That is very important. So, and this can be done by expanding your vocabulary as well. Eradicate the word shows from your essay. You want to use other words like it paints, it conjures, it highlights, accentuates, heightens, mocks. Make it sort of interesting to read. Like, I don't want to every time, reading essay, see, oh, this shows that, this showcases this depicts that. Change it up. Use these different words to express that, to express your ideas. But also with short sentences, though, don't use too short sentences. Like, I have seen times where the sentence is like super short and then you're like continuing the sentence in the second sentence. For example, this shows that, which is seen in. Avoid that as well, because that can be hard to read too. So you want to have short, proper sentences, but like not too short or not too long. So that balance and varied sentences to increase the sort of the interesting factor in your essays. Alright, now looking at figurative language. How do we include figurative language? This can be a bit hard from the get-go, like, because you're like, I'm writing an essay analytically. How do I make it more flowy and figurative and add on to it? So this is how we do it. So figurative language, this, you want to like work with phrases, different phrases, and once you find a phrase that really sticks, you want to try and use it in your essay. So this is, one of the things that you can memorize and try and include in different ways. So for example, we've got here Pacino sanctified by the limelight of Hollywood, or mirroring his surrogate, Prospero, Shakespeare conjures this striking image. Or, while Pacino feigns the inclusion of his audience in this docudrama through the collective pronoun, he jarringly deploys populistic rhetoric in order to prioritize feeling over analysis that aligns with his own personal interpretation of Shakespeare. So with that, you could see how fun it was to read that sentence, how it made sense and it flowed and it was interesting to read. So you want to aim for that. And how do you get there? Through practice. You get there through practice. So definitely something to think about, something, in your initial sort of essay plans to try and incorporate. But yeah, so if you've got any questions about that, please let me know, and about any of that, right? And obviously I'm also happy to answer any text-specific questions that you may have. But with each text, obviously, this is going to be different. So like with Pacino, you know, this idea sanctified by the limelight of Hollywood, you can't say that for other writers. Where you can, for example, with other writers talk about the experience or something. Like with Atwood, you know, you can talk about how literary power or something. So that's just an example there for you. Okay, so now we have gone through our syllabus, our critical analysis. Yeah, so we've got the tick happening as we go, and writing with flair. So I really want you to sort of keep in mind, you know, as you go through module B, is that your focus is on the text, what the text mean, what ideas the text is talking about. Again, let me summarize this for you. The big idea that I really want you to take away today is the importance of textual integrity. What textual integrity is, what the measures of textual integrity are. Textual integrity is a measure of the text's value and significance in society, and it is measured through the coherent use of language, concepts, and form, and also through the effect that the text generates on contemporary and contextual audiences. So hopefully by now, you know, you would see that if you've already done Common Mod and Mod A, and now today we've gone through Mod B, you can see the way in which skills across the modules are building up on one another. Every time, you know, the essay writing, really the key structures of essay writing, the analysis, the personal voice, the module focus, and linking back to the module focus and the personal thesis always stays the same. It is a matter of changing that based on the text and based on the module focus. That is what is super important. Alright, so now any questions at all? I'm going to give you a second to sort of jot down any questions that you've got, and I'll be answering them as we go. And you know, please feel free to ask questions about obviously anything that I've gone through today, about your text, about like study habits and stuff, and I'll talk about study habits too in a sec. So yeah, if you've got any questions at all, if you've got questions about quotes and stuff, how many to use, paragraphs. Also, if you've got any questions about extension English, I'm happy to answer those as well. So I've done extension and love extension questions. So if you've got any about those, feel free to send them through too. Now, let me take a moment to talk about my top 5 tips when it comes to studying for English and in general in the HSC. Can I just first say that when it comes to English, and this is not inherent like for everyone, but having an appreciation for the text and can really help with the understanding of the text. So, you know, appreciating the text for what it is, for the big idea that it's contributing to society can be really helpful. Like, it can really frame your thinking, right? So if I'm looking at, for example, T.S. Eliot and how he talks about alienation in a modern society, and this basically this individual the challenges and individual faces to, you know, grasp living in a modern society. Like, I think that's really cool, the way in which he is depicting that. May not have thought that the first time I studied it, that is for sure. The first time I studied it, I was like, what's happening here? But, you know, once you get through to the point where you understand the text and you see what the text is doing, it can really help understand the text, and it can really help with the way in which you talk about your text in the essays. Secondly, practice makes perfect. So practice questions are so important. Your first essay, and this is something that I will keep harping on about, your first essay is not going to be your best essay. Your best essay is going to be the one, more than likely the one that you write on the day in the HSC. Because, you know, that is by the time that you would see this, you would, you know, look back at yourself this time next year, earlier next year, and think about, wow, you know, just the journey of, you know, going from writing your first essay to being like an expert on your English essays. Like, it's quite interesting to see that. So practice makes perfect. Please practice against a range of different questions. Don't keep repeating, practicing against like similar questions. There is a really awesome list of practice questions on ATANotes, on the ATANotes forum, where one of the previous tutors amazingly wrote down lots of different questions for the different modules, and for different text specific questions, like different questions for like text as well. So I would definitely say to check that out. You can obviously find other practice questions online. using the HSC papers is again great, but the issue with that is sometimes they don't have the extracts, like it's not published, like you can't see it, so that can be a bit annoying. But if you can like find it, like if your teacher can access it, or something, definitely have a go at them. And secondly, ask for feedback, and that brings me to my third point: ask for feedback. Feedback is crucial. You can't just write an essay and put it away and say, okay, my essay is written, it's looking really good. That's great to have that kind of confidence, it's great, but you need the feedback, especially from a teacher, and or a tutor even, to sort of know how you're going with it, what you can improve on it. Every time you do a different essay, get it marked, get feedback on it, see your progression, and every time you'll find something to work on. That is really important. That is the key, honestly, to success in English Advanced. If I was asked what's one thing that is important, in getting a good mark in English, I would say feedback on your essays. Write essays, get feedback. That is it. Time management, of course, is important. Time management, like, think about it, 2 hours to write three, essentially, 2 essays, one creative writing or just cursive writing or whatever, like, that's hard. It's not easy. So time management is so important. It's very important to think, to practice beforehand. And a good technique is to time yourself 10% less, sorry, 10%, not 10 minutes, 10% less of the actual time you'll get for the essay when you're doing your practice papers, because that can really help. But sometimes, just the adrenaline rush that you get on the day, if you're going like a couple of minutes over, don't feel too bad either. That is usually and I found that myself, like I would go like 10 minutes over. Like there were times where I'd go over and I'd go, oh my goodness, what am I supposed to do? But that was just me, I don't know, like subconsciously spending like maybe just me, I guess, subconsciously writing a lot more, not being concise enough. And then on the day, I managed to finish everything in time, but that could be attributed to obviously the exam rush, the adrenaline rush that I need to get this done. So that can happen, but you don't want to be in a position. You want to be in a position where you can write an essay in 40 minutes. You want to feel confident going into that exam room. Finally, look after yourself. This is so important. Look, everyone is different. Everyone has different study tips, study techniques that work for them. I always found that most of the times, whatever like the generic techniques were never worked for me. So I had to find my own sort of funder for studying, like my own fundamentals and foundations for studying a specific subject or studying in general. And I'm still exploring that to this day as a uni student, where I'm trying different things, and now I sort of know, okay, this works for me. So that exploration is very important, and it does set you up for later on as well. If you are doing co-curricular activities and stuff, definitely don't leave them. Like, you want to have something outside of HSC, just because the HSC is not everything. Your marks don't determine everything, and a big thing is 50% of your marks are like locked away in a treasure chest until the day of the HSC. So even if you feel like you haven't done your best in an assignment, don't let that get you down. You still have 50% of the game to be played on the day. This is just the half of the prep, so don't give up on yourself. And finally, I just want to conclude by wishing you guys all the very, very best for this year, for next term, the term after, and of course for the HSC. I hope you found today helpful. Please ask questions, and it was lovely being here today. I hope you guys found it helpful. I will see you guys next time in, and I again want to wish you all the very best of luck from all of us here at 8 Notes.